Hi, everyone. I'm Ina, and I head the ingredients research at Euromonitor. And today I'm here to talk about the longevity ingredient opportunity, largely where there's a lot of hype. So my talk is focusing on how do you separate signals from noise. And as I talk about that, I'm perhaps going to start with talking a little bit about how consumers are viewing longevity. It's largely about extending the health span, as you know. So it's not just about consumers wanting to live longer, but it's about consumers wanting to live healthier, active, functional for longer. And in that sense, longevity is largely about bridging the gap between health span and lifespan. It's also about maintaining mobility, energy, cognition, all of that for longer. And then we're starting to see a lot of activities and innovations in the NAD plus mitochondrial health space and a lot of other spaces as well. And one thing to note here is ingredients are the primary delivery mechanism for this. And as a result, we're starting to see a lot of activities and patents being filed in the ingredient space, and many ingredients moving from early stages of research to commercial mainstream as well. So what it does is, for a lot of ingredient companies and FMCG companies alike, it's starting to create a challenge. How are you going to decide which are the ingredients that you want to invest in today, and which are the ones that are going to scale versus the ones that are actually riding the short-term longevity wave? And that is exactly what I'm going to unpack during the conversation today. I'm going to try and connect three things. Firstly, what do consumers want? Second, what science can actually support? And third, what is the market rewarding commercially? And before I do that, sorry, just bear with me for a second. Right. Before I do that, I just wanted to let you know that the talk that I've put together is based on the data and insights coming from Euromonitor's flagship product called Passport, where we track countries, economies, and consumers. And we also track the evolving retail landscape. So specifically for the presentation today, these are the industries that are highlighted in the boxes that I have leveraged. Right? And with that, I'm going back to longevity. So firstly, longevity is starting to become a mainstream consumer priority. And it's largely being driven by the cultural redefinition of what it means to age well. Consumers are very quickly moving from reactive to more preventative approaches, focusing on daily optimization. And then, secondly, it's also the advances in science and technology, which is making consumers aware of these scientific concepts like the concept of inflammation. And all these concepts were once really limited to the science classrooms, and they are now starting to become mainstream. And thirdly, it's the aging population. But the aging population doesn't tell you the full story, because longevity isn't just limited to the aging population. Today, it's about a 30 years old worrying about or thinking about burnout, a 40 years old thinking about I don't know, energy, a 50 years old thinking about cognition, and it goes on. So largely the point I'm trying to make here is that longevity is really applicable to consumers across all life stages and across all age groups. And as the longevity thinking starts to spread, it's starting to influence how companies think about innovation across food, beverage, and supplements. And then longevity itself is also starting to move from just supporting the basic nutrition, anti-aging sort of a thing to supporting more functional pillars of well-being, like the physical performance, emotional balance, mental resilience, and even focused on a lifestyle positioning to some extent. And then all of this is being, again, delivered by the ingredients, as we were talking about earlier. So with all of that, again, we're starting to see more ingredients, more claims, more focus on technologies, but yes, less clarity on what is actually going to scale. So that, again, brings me to the question of how do we separate noise from signals? So for that, we're going to need an approach or a sort of a framework. So for an ingredient to be identified as a signal, it needs to pass through 4 stages. The first one is about biological relevance. Does the ingredient actually target any right mechanisms of aging? Because if it doesn't, it might look good in theory, but it will not translate. Second is the scientific evidence, which is largely about, is it supported by any scientific data, which in turn will ensure that the ingredient is actually going to work. Third, is it in line with the consumer outcomes? Meaning, is it showcasing results that consumers can actually feel and are visible, and also in line with what they expect to see? And fourth is the scalability, meaning can the ingredient live in multiple daily formats of food and beverages? Because for longevity to work, it needs to be available in formats that consumers can actually embed into their daily routines. So with that, I am going to go a little deeper into the biological relevance filter, which is largely about, is the ingredient targeting the right mechanisms of aging? So at its core, biological relevance is actually driven by a core set of biological pathways. I've tried to move slightly away from the science, and at a high level, it is about how is your body producing and maintaining energy. Second is about how is it responding to inflammation? How is it repairing and regenerating? And then how is it handling stress? And then lastly, how is it able to protect itself from the cellular damage? So these set of biological pathways are constantly active in the body all the time. And these are the ones that define how quickly consumers feel fatigued and how quickly can they recover. And then again, I said this earlier, for an ingredient to work, it needs to connect to any of these, at least one of these biological pathways. So we're going to quickly look at some of the brands that have tried to bring this concept to life. So first is the example of a longevity drink called TMW. When they thought about the formulation, they started thinking about the multiple pathways of aging that they wanted to attack. And that's when they brought in the ingredients that could actually address or respond to these biological pathways. So again, the end product was biologically relevant. And then second example that I have is from a brand called Zoyava, wherein they also stacked multiple pathways, but their approach was slightly different. They brought in a hero ingredient, resveratrol, which had long-term association with anti-aging or longevity, I should say. And then they brought in the additional ingredients, the antioxidants, just to layer in those ingredients and to offer other benefits. So on one hand, they were able to expand the value proposition, or I should say wellness proposition, but the actual link of those ingredients to longevity was slightly less explicit. It was implied in the formulation, but the way they approached it was slightly different. So if you look at both these brands, they worked with the concept of stacking. So one was stacking the pathways, and the other was stacking ingredients. And both these concepts are important, but as the longevity thinking evolves, it's going to be crucial for companies to start thinking about how are they stacking, because consumers are going to increasingly demand that their products do address at least one of the longevity pathways that I was talking about earlier. With that, I am moving to the next criteria, which is scientific credibility, which is about once you've established the biological relevance, it's about, is the ingredient going to work? Just having a good product idea isn't enough. It needs to work in the body at the right dosage in multiple formats. And different brands have tried to do that. So again, I've picked up the example of two companies. One is called Jury. They do a lot of patches. So they have collagen patches and also NAD Plus that you can see on the screen now. So what they've done beautifully is they've not just thought about the ingredients or the pathways. They wanted to make sure that the ingredient is absorbed and utilized in the body. And that's when their patches do work. So, and that's where the credibility also comes from for the consumer. Second is the example of a brand called Olly that again did try stacking different pathways, and they brought in different ingredients. So again, the ingredients do have linkage to longevity, but again, the strength of the evidence in the actual outcome might vary. So that was a little bit about scientific credibility, which was the criteria number 2. I'm now moving to the third criteria. Once you've established the biological relevance and also the scientific credibility, then the next question is it in line with what consumers do expect? Is it in line with the consumer outcomes? And here's an uncomfortable truth that this slide is telling you. So the chart on the right speaks about the launches. So the launches on one hand are chasing immunity as the claim. Immunity is the top claim that these launches are chasing. But what consumers are telling us is that they are more worried about skin, sleep, stress, and digestive health. So there is a big gap between what consumers want and what launches are chasing. And there lies the opportunity. I mean, bridging the gap is the opportunity. And that brings me to criteria number 4, which is about scalability as the core filter. So we've spoken about biological relevance and scientific credibility. I just want to flip the question for a moment, because it's the biggest graveyard for any product is not bad science. It's the science that never scaled. So the question we are asking is not if the ingredient's going to work. We are asking if can the ingredient reach enough number of people in enough number of formats across the right price points. And therefore, there are 2 criteria. First is the category diffusion, meaning can the ingredient live in food, beverage, gummies, different supplements, because you don't want to be capping the ingredient into just one format, especially if you are an ingredient multinational. Second is about the tier presence, which means that to buy an ingredient, or are you going to find your ingredient in a SKU in the nearby Tesco Booth store, or will you have to go to the most premium store and you can only find it there? And this is going to make a big difference. Right. And then one last thing that I just wanted to talk about scalability is basically the ingredients that are going to scale, they are going to sit at the intersection of biological relevance, scientific credibility, and also what the market's rewarding commercially. So again, my scalability filter, I'm just diving in a little deeper. And let's say you pass each of the ingredient through the 2 lenses. One here is the commercial momentum lens, which speaks about how quickly the ingredient is growing. And the second lens is how quickly it's moving from one category to the other. We said both of these lenses were important. So what does this tell us is, on the top right, you are seeing the platform ingredients. These are the ones that have scaled, like vitamin C or magnesium. These have been in the market for some time. There is a commercial momentum, meaning we are seeing more SKUs with these ingredients, and at the same time, they have spread across multiple categories. And on the top left, you have the emerging ingredients where there is a commercial momentum, but they are largely today restricted to limited formats. And then on the bottom right, I do have the ingredients that do have the breadth. They live in multiple categories, but the commercial momentum is lacking. So, and then lastly, we've got the niche ones where we've got coenzyme Q as well. And these are the ingredients where there is science, there is a commercial momentum, perhaps limited, and they haven't scaled. They haven't moved from one category to multiple categories. It does not mean they are not going to scale. I'm just trying to say that today they haven't scaled. But today, when we talk about longevity, these niche ingredients are the ones that everybody is talking about. So I'm just trying to highlight that there is a gap between scientific credibility and what market or the commercial scalability, wider than perhaps what companies have factored in. Right. And then lastly, I mean, with that, I'm just going to conclude and bring together everything that I have discussed, which was about the 4 criteria. Firstly, it was the biological relevance. For an ingredient to scale, it needs to deliver against one of the biological pathways. And then it must be supported with credible data, which is what scientific credibility is about. And eventually, it needs to translate into consumer outcomes that consumers can feel and they actually demand. And lastly was the scalability, meaning it should be able to live in multiple formats, because for these ingredients to work in the longevity scheme of things, these ingredients need to deliver the daily optimization doses. And that's what scalability was about. I mean, there are going to be really fewer ingredients that will pass all the 4 filters. But in practical terms, it means simple things. For FMCG companies, it's about just stay grounded. Don't only design for the label. Design products that are going to deliver actual benefits to the consumers. And for ingredient companies, what this really means is that you don't have to just chase the most advanced molecule. One really needs to think about how this molecule is going to deliver in the end product and the outcome that consumers do want. Because for ingredients to work, they need to work simply, consistently, and at scale as well. With that, I'm just going to open the floor for any questions. Thank you.